Welcome everyone to our first recruitment advisor webinar for 2024. Hope you had a great holiday season. Um, we'll do some quick introductions. My name is Dominic Green, Oregon 99, Senior Director of Chapter Development. Been back on staff now for about 5.5 years. Previously was a university administrator, and then former staff member. I was leadership consultant and director of expansion and recruitment when I was first on staff in the late 90s, early 2000s. So excited to be back, primarily focusing on expansion and starting up our new chapters as well as recruitment efforts for the fraternity. So I'll let CJ introduce himself.
Yeah, hi. My name's CJ Gibson, Director of Chapter Development on staff, Western Illinois 21. Just finished up grad school and came onto staff back in May. Primarily working with a portfolio of chapters and kind of helping oversee our meta-merit and CEP process, among some other things. So,
Perfect. Full disclaimer, my puppy got fixed today. And so if you hear just yelping, or I think he should be fine. I apologize in advance. But that happened earlier today, and he's been quite whiny this evening. So I apologize in advance, but we are recording, so we'll see how this goes. So just want to do a quick overview. So what this looks like for us today, this is kind of an overview of recruitment. The reason why we're focusing on recruitment as the first webinar, knowing that it is a high priority for everyone who's on this call, knowing that, and just full transparency, we had a pretty, not one of the best falls when it comes to recruitment overall. Probably in the last 15 years, it was one of the lowest amount of people recruited by Delta Upsilon chapters, associate chapters, in the last 15 years. So we are realizing that it is a high priority. Recruitment is always a priority, but making sure that we're emphasizing that we're doing a little bit more effort and resourcing for the recruitment effort going into the spring semester. I know for some of you it's winter quarter or winter semester, but we want to make sure that's the reason why we're focusing on recruitment for the first webinar. Amplify traditionally has been a program that has been a summer webinar series for recruitment chairs. So when it first launched, it was open to everyone. The last couple of years, it's been kind of targeted towards specific chapters at high recruitment needs. So our thought process was, let's do a winter Amplify program for the undergrads. And I'll talk about what we just did the undergrad program on this past Tuesday night. So that recording will be available on our website as well. So if you want to see what we train the undergrads on, that should be available hopefully by tomorrow or early next week. So, but we took a combination of information we covered with the undergrads, as well as some things we're going to talk with the undergrads next week. But we also targeted specifically around how you as an advisor can really help with assisting your chapters, associate chapters, with any kind of recruitment efforts. Realizing that I think what we've learned the last couple of years, especially, is the preparation of going into the recruitment process is often where chapters fail, or they think they're prepared, but they're not prepared at all. I think especially for our newer chapters, just being able to newer chapters, smaller chapters, getting overwhelmed by the size and what the other chapters are doing. So we wanted to kind of talk about where you can really assist. Like I said, these are some areas. There's plenty of probably other areas we can assist with as well, but we kind of narrowed it down. We want to try to get everything in an hour, and then we will have some opportunities. I can do any kind of follow-up with any of you if you have specific needs for your chapter, and if there are specific things that might take an additional follow-up conversation. Totally open to doing that after this. So CJ, anything else before we get rolling?
I would just say, I think Dominic mentioned that organization can often be kind of the thing that gets the undergraduates kind of, all out of sorts and anxious. And I think that this is especially the case when it comes to winter recruitment, and not necessarily because it's a larger scale, but because oftentimes that's when, new VP recruitments are coming on board. And so I think that, helping them get a foundation of what it looks like if it is a lighter semester before going back into the fall, where it's typically fall or summer, where it's typically, a lot larger size, can really help set them up when it comes time for that larger process. So,
especially setting the tone. We just had our President's Academy and Emerging Leaders Academy this past weekend in Indiana. And I even heard some presidents be like, "Oh, we don't really care about spring recruitment. It's really kind of just practice for us to really get our feet wet and really understand and feel comfortable with things, and then we'll go in." And I was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" So you could prepare, you could be ready, you could do a lot better, but you choose not to and kind of undersell or underperform because they view it as a practice semester, which in our world, like if you're meeting great guys, you should put the effort at in both semesters, right? We'll talk about 365 recruitment in a second, but I had to have a friendly debate with one of our chapter presidents this past weekend about when he literally said they were just going to underperform this semester because they didn't really care as much about spring. And this is a chapter that is less than 30 men, right? So this is a bigger picture conversation. We got in a good place where he kind of fully understood, like, hey, this is really important, that we need to put as much effort in the spring as we're doing in the fall, just because you might not have as many people going through recruitment in the spring, but it still doesn't mean we're going to give a C- effort into the recruitment process. Perfect. So this is really standard. This has been around. Those of you that have been around for a while know that there's a simple 5-step recruitment model. We covered this with the undergrads, but we thought it was just to simplify the recruitment process for individuals, right? Because I think one of the conversations we talked a lot about this past weekend at President's Academy was around promotion of friendship, really being friend raising, right? So the 5-step recruit model that's been around probably since the early 90s really talked about specifically how do you break it down and simplify the recruitment process. So this is all basic knowledge for all of us on this call, but just want to remind everyone, obviously you want to meet them, you want to meet these individuals. And often this is where chapters sometimes struggle is, where do we meet these people? We'll talk about that in a second, but where do we meet these individuals? How can we meet them? How do you make them your friend, right? I think this is sometimes where chapters falter in this 5-step recruitment model. We'll talk about where sometimes chapters jump the gun a little bit too quickly. You want to meet them, you want to make them your friends, and then you want to introduce them to your friends. Sometimes your friends are fraternity brothers, or all your friends are fraternity brothers, but also how do you make them feel comfortable and introduce them to your friends and really get to know them through a lot of this can work through the informal process, but sometimes chapters really can utilize this process in a structured or more formal recruitment process. Fourth step is introducing the fraternity. This is where often we see sometimes smaller chapters or newer chapters jumping from step 1 to step 4, and there's not the friend raising or get to know you piece in between, right? They meet the guy at a tabling event and then automatically start shoving DU down their throats about and that's great, but then they often forget that this is also a friendship club. This is also an organization that one of our founding principles is promotion of friendship. We want to get to know them, and sometimes we have to rush this process, right? I think in the 90s, many of us went through rush and not necessarily recruitment, but I think it's important that we help them understand. We'll talk all about this. And the last one is ask them to join, right? I think this is where we see chapters who get stressed out about the recruitment process where they stopped doing other things in their chapter where they are just doing recruitment events and guys are getting burned out on that. They're not doing brotherhood events, they're not doing some other things, and they often just meet someone, they're like, oh my god, we love you, and then immediately start jamming the fraternity down their throat about all the things like, well, this is how much it is to live here, and these are our principles, and they overwhelm them with a little bit over information overload, and then they're like, hey, do you want to join? And the guy's like, wait a minute, I don't even know you. So this is something that we just wanted to like lay the foundation for sometimes helping the undergrads that you work with, help them understand we can break it down so recruitment doesn't have to be a stressful process, right? I think we've heard from a lot of undergrads that they think recruitment's awkward. I think I did not use this quote is not for me, but someone told me recruitment is often the fine art of awkward man flirting, right? So the fraternity recruitment process can be awkward. I think this Gen Z generation is afraid to be awkward, right? They're afraid. I think one of your questions that one of you asked was like, people are afraid to get rejected, the fear of rejection, fear of being awkward. Like they're already awkward, so then they think, and the recruitment process is awkward. So how can we get people more comfortable in the recruitment process? So recruitment really is more about friend raising and not necessarily have them be so stressed out about it, right? And we'll talk more about that in the 365 model. And it kind of decreases the stress level because you're really trying to show prospective members the day in the life of the fraternity, which often in a formal recruitment model, it gets structured, it's rushed, and there's like an event every night, and people are burned out, and then they sometimes forget that like, hey, recruitment can actually be fun, right? So
Mhm.
just think something to think about.
And Dominic, if I can real
Yeah.
quick, I think if we're thinking about Gen Z too, one of the big things that Gen Z cares about is having that authentic connection. Whether that's with people, whether that's with companies, doesn't matter. They just want authenticity. And so when you rush from one to four, it makes, these potential new members, it makes them feel like a number and not like somebody who, it's not like the fraternity is actually wanting them to join for who they are. They're wanting them to join because it's a number, and that's not what Gen Z wants. They want that connection, and so that's why I think it's easy for chapters to rush from one to four. But I think that if they take their time and really focus on step two and three, it can really help, with this five-step model.
Exactly. And I think they often forget to ask the right questions to get to know the guys coming through the recruitment process, right? They're getting the same questions from every other fraternity they're meeting. So how can we, as what CJ said, make it more authentic, actually listen to them, get to know them, and then introduce them. So if their interests are, they're in student government and they played soccer in high school, like who are the other soccer guys in the chapter? Who are the other people that are, or, I was, fully admit I was a student government dork, middle school, high school, super involved, but that was something that I really enjoyed. So, guy, if someone comes going through recruitment as former student body president, I was able to connect with them about that effort, but also the people who are former student government people make great fraternity officers because they often look at the fraternity as a leadership as a way to further their leadership journey. Because I learned super involved in high school, get to college, and I was like, ooh, student government at the college level is not necessarily, it's a little too political, and it's not necessarily what I want to focus on. But the fraternity offered a lot of leadership opportunities. So this is an easy model, but it's a good way to remind the chapters you're working with that we can break down the recruitment process and not make it seem so stressful. Perfect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and CJ and I can talk about. Think about your recruitment, your primary recruitment officer. Some of your chapters call it VP recruitment. Some of you still call it recruitment chair, rush chair, whatever you call him. Is thinking about what does that person do, and how do you and are do you feel comfortable talking to the primary recruitment officer? I'll just call that person, the chief recruitment officer, is and what does that person do? So I think this is where, especially going in the spring, often these people don't have a ton of experience with recruitment. We see a majority of recruitment VPs be sophomores or even freshmen sometimes, who literally in some cases freshmen who just joined in the fall, and then it's like, hey, you have a personality, kind of, you can talk to people, yeah, well, you'll be VP recruitment. And I think often chapters play the not it game about like, ooh, recruitment, that seems like a lot of work, right? So whatever that person is, I'll be honest, this is where, as an advisor, we don't have strict officer structure. We have recommended officer structure within the fraternity. If you feel that your chapter might need two VP recruitments, a lot of our stronger performing chapters have two recruitment VPs. They might give them different responsibilities, but they might structure that a little bit differently. So you have two primary people in part of recruitment, and you could split up their job responsibilities. But really, I will say this as a campus professional. I worked at Northwestern and at University of Washington. The highest performing recruitment chapters are the chapters that had two people in charge of recruitment, because often where CJ and I have seen this, CJ's only been on staff since the summer, but I've in all my years of experience, often spring recruitment, particularly a brand new person in recruitment who's never sometimes I'm working with a couple chapters right now. The guy who's in charge of recruitment never did not ever go through the formal recruitment process on the other side. He joined informal, and now he's in charge of a formal recruitment process for the chapter, and he is completely deer in headlights. So I'm coaching him, working with him, but realizing that often that's where advisors can step in. But if there's two VP recruitments, they can lean on each other. Ideally, you might have a chapter I worked with, they always had a senior VP recruitment and a junior VP recruitment, which meant that one of them was on a calendar cycle, a calendar year cycle, and the other one was on an academic year cycle. Does that make sense? So someone had a January to December term, and then someone had a May to May term, which meant that there was always a senior and junior VP recruitment. But that model worked because there was always someone who was more senior in the role, but they had two different roles, and they played really well together. Whatever you all want to do, it's important what that looks like. Some of his responsibilities for this person need to be a motivator, that cheerleader, that getting people excited about things, that event planner. Often where chapters really struggle, and we'll talk about event planning in a second, is organizing events, planning events, letting people know that in the chapter and communicating these events to people. I worked with the chapter in the fall, and I kid you not, only about 45% of the chapter showed up to every formal recruitment event. And I think they had almost 1,200 people going through recruitment, and only 45% of the chapters showed up. And a lot of it was, hey, people had work, people weren't back yet because it was the week before school started. But a lot of it came down to was the chapter never communicated the recruitment schedule to the men as soon as they got it, which they got it in spring, and they never prioritized people being present at recruitment, right? So obviously they did not do well in formal recruitment. That's something I'll be there in 2 weeks, but it's an opportunity to really work with them. But thinking about this, so also really setting the vision and goal setter. This is where, as an advisor, we can really assist with is what are realistic goals. If normally the chapter maybe gets 3 or 4 men in the spring, how can you maybe set a stretch goal for them, and maybe that's 8 or 9, but then that's where they need to rely on not just formal recruitment, because often I think chapters put all their eggs in the basket during a formal recruitment process and then get, I'll just use air quote, burned out, and they think their job is done, right? So we'll talk more about that when we talk about 365 recruitment, but I think it's important as an advisor, from an advisor standpoint, to make sure you're motivating guys to get them realizing that recruitment is beyond just 1 or 2 weeks at the beginning of the semester, because that's a huge problem we're seeing in our chapters. Logistics, marketing, whatever that looks like for your person, but this person becomes, I'll use the sports analogy, right? This person kind of quarterbacks everything, person or people quarterback the entire process. And then, so from your perspective, just making sure though that the person fully understands their role and also really all the components that can go into it. There's probably other things on this list. And especially if you have any other any other ideas on here, is if there's any other, if you, the chat box, you can put it in here. If you think that there's any other major components of the VP recruitment's role, or whatever you call the person, it might be recruitment chair, recruitment chair. So if you have any other thoughts on what else this person should be doing, put it in the chat box. Love to hear from you all. But if there's anything specifically that you might think of, other kind of major buckets of responsibility. All right, I'm going to move on, but if you have any thoughts, put it in the chat box, and then we can go from there. Perfect. So let's talk about the recruitment team. I think a lot of chapters, sometimes I mentioned before, sometimes put all their eggs into one person being in charge, but this is also, successful chapters also have multiple people on their recruitment team, right? So you can call it the rush team. I know some chapters have a VP recruitment and then they have rush chairs, whatever you call them, we're fine. But whatever that looks like, of making sure, I've seen successful chapters also have very specific responsibilities for the people on their team, right? So someone is in charge of logistics. So just think about that person picks up orders the food from Chipotle, picks it up, gets ice, gets cups, gets plates. Often I think it's funny when you go to a recruitment event and then there's no plate. They get all this food that needs to go on plates, and there's no napkins, there's no plates, there's no forks, and then you're just like, right? So who is the person that's doing logistics? Who is doing marketing? What does that look like? Is this the social media chair for the chapter, or does the recruitment VP have his own marketing social media person that's on his team? It could be the same person, but often I think this is where chapters can be flexible. You might be VP external, you might be the social chair, but you might be a fantastic recruiter and you could play a role during the formal recruitment process, or at least say the first month of school, right? Whatever that looks like, and helping not only from the recruiting side, but also what does it look like? Who's the person who's texting people and reminding people about events, right? Who's the one who's picking up people? If rides are a thing, like, do you need to go organize and connect with potential members and pick them up, right? Often we need to put more of an effort out there, not just wait them to come to us. We need to make sure and make our events as accessible as possible. Be like, hey, if you need a ride from residence hall, we'll come pick you up, just to let them know, like, hey, we care about you. We know your residence hall is super far away from our house. We'll come pick you up, right? Whatever that looks like. But from an organization, this is event planning, whatever that looks like. I strongly emphasize, sometimes I've mentioned before, in a chapter that might have two VP recruitments, they might give half of these things on the what's the role in the team. They give half of those responsibilities to one VP and the other half to the other VP, and that person kind of quarterbacks their own people underneath them. Whatever works for you all. It's important there. I think the other big thing too, is you all can probably help the chapter identify who the best recruiters would be. Often I think I learned this in one of our new chapters, an associate chapter right now. I've been working with them a lot the last year, but when I asked them, there's a lot of personality in that group, but none of them thought they were good recruiters because they'd never been through recruitment before. So they didn't understand what a recruiter does. But I was like, this person can talk to someone. This person is personable. This person's an extrovert. This person is just good at making small talk, whatever that is. But sometimes advisors, we all need you to help them maybe understand that people are, utilizing their talents. It might be for some of you, your chapters that have been around for a while. Sometimes seniors check out and you're like, oh, I'm too old. I'll just let the younger guys do recruitment. My chapter, we always leaned heavily. I still can remember, I went through recruitment a long time ago. Some of the people who actually, the reason why I joined were the juniors and seniors in the chapter when I was a freshman. And they were the people why I joined. Like I ended up hanging out a lot more with the sophomores because they're the class above me. But the guys who actually got me to join, because my chapter is very intentional about having seniors be present at some of our smaller scale events. When we had dinners, we had more events that weren't just like barbecues and poker tournaments, but it was much more of a little more intimate, much more events that had a lot more one-on-one interactions. But the juniors and seniors are the ones who stepped in and were like, hey, we care, we want our chapter to be here, we want this chapter to be sustainable for a long time. So how do you really tap your older guys? How do you really tap the people and be like, hey, I need you to give the first 2 weeks of school. I know you're not on exec. I know you might be the former VP recruitment. I know one of the chapters I'm working with right now, their VP recruitment, he is now on their recruitment team because he was like, I should be done with recruitment. And they were all like, no, 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 no. You're in charge of recruitment last year. We need you to still be on the recruitment team. So whatever that looks like for you, I think as an advisor, sometimes chapters, exec boards are not great about identifying the talent. And you probably might know better from your perspective because they might be super outgoing. They might be the guys that they could, I always joke around, they could, get my water bottle to join you because they could just talk anyone into anything. Those are the people I still remember in my chapter. There was a man in my chapter that we counted, I think my junior year, he was responsible for about 70% of us getting us to a recruitment event. Either we met him at a tabling event, we met him, he just cold called us, he texted us, whatever that looked like. But this was someone that was so good at recruitment. He was never the recruitment chair. He was never on exec, but he loved recruitment. And that's where he stepped up every year. But we could literally point at this one person named Al, and he was so good at recruitment. But we realized 60, 70% of the guys, we could credit him for at least getting us to the chapter, getting us to an event, getting us to the house. And so that's super helpful. So help from an advisor standpoint, really think about who's that top talent in your chapter that can really be the best recruiters, the first impression guys, the ones who can really sell and really, not only articulate what DU has done for them, but also really be the best salespeople. CJ, anything else to add in on roles or recruiters?
Um, I think that what I'd add in is I think for some of our smaller chapters, I think that the idea when you first hear the idea of a recruitment team, I think oftentimes the undergrads at least kind of get scared by that because there's only 8, 9 guys in a chapter, and we already have somebody who devoted that we elected to this position. They should be one doing this, and I think that this is where your VP recruitment and yourselves can kind of talk to the chapter like yes, this guy is the quarterback for recruitment. However, everyone's going to have a role to play. And I think that's big for the smaller chapters. I think they get scared by it and they kind of run from it. But I think this is where we can really talk to them and say, no, like everybody's putting in the work. Just everyone's going to have different tasks here, and it can be the same throughout. You can mix it up as you go along, but I think that helps the chapters and the undergraduate members understand like they all have a role in it. And then obviously for our larger chapters, it's a lot easier to actually have a committee, a team that kind of is dedicated to this and not the whole chapter having a part for every single thing. But I think especially for our smaller chapters, it's something to think about as well.
Absolutely. And it's okay to admit that some people in the chapter just aren't spectacular recruiters. They're not, they're just, and they will fully admit, I'm awkward. I'm not great at recruiting. Like, what does that look like? We actually talked about this the other night with the undergrads is what does it look like to pair those people up with people who are good recruiters at an event? Like sometimes those people can be there and be the ones that are flipping burgers, playing basketball, playing video games, whatever that looks like, or sand volleyball in the case of Tampa, right? So whatever that looks like, they are there, they are present. Just because they might not love recruitment or feel like they're the best recruiter does not mean they don't need to become to your events, right? Because I think that's where I think we've seen some associate chapters and smaller chapters completely be like, oh, you don't like recruitment, that's fine, you don't have to come. I was like, whoa, no, no, no. We've never said that as well. So talk to people about roles. Sometimes that conversation can be a little bit awkward, but I think if you assign different people different roles, I mean, back in the day, there are times when chapters would be incredibly strategic, but every single person would get assigned to one of the best recruiters. And some chapters do this where you have 7 it's 7 alpha recruiters who use that terminology, and then everyone in the chapter is assigned to work with that alpha recruiter and being kind of the recruitment lead and really going out there. So someone might be the basketball guy, so they're going to go to the rec center and play basketball, and that's where they're going to meet people, right? So whatever that looks like. So you could be as strategic as you want, and if you want more, we could go. I could have another 2 hour conversation about this, but I think it's a good opportunity to think about how do you get everyone involved and engaged, because that's where often chapters struggle, is getting people to show up to events. But we'll talk more about that in a second. So I want to talk about marketing. From a marketing standpoint, I don't know why. Okay. So think about marketing. This is where you all could also can influence, have a huge influence as well. We're learning that Gen Z is looking at social media. They're like, hey, I'm checking out a couple chapters on campus. They're going straight to the Instagram account. Often, a lot of our chapters do not have a great Instagram game, or they don't really I think they don't do a great job at telling their story. Does that make sense? So they're not going out there and showing the day in the life of DU chapters. They're not spotlighting brothers. They're not taking pictures of events that they're having. I know for a lot of these chapters, they're holding events. They're just not taking pictures. I was told by a chapter, oh, we only take pictures at events that, like tailgates, and we usually have alcohol in us. And I was like, great. So you only think about taking pictures when you have red solo cups in your hand. And then guess what? DU will not our social media team at DU headquarters will not repost those if there's alcohol present in it. Like, we want to be able to share this stuff, but talk to your chapter. Some chapters really use TikTok well, as well. So we want to make sure though that, I know in some campuses, some chapters, some of our bigger chapters have these like crazy good, for the most part, like recruitment videos, whatever it is that you can help work with them on marketing. What does it look like to do on campus marketing? Is this tabling? Is this putting flyers or posters up? What does it look like? I know some chapters have put stuff in dining halls. Often it's like, where are the freshmen hanging out on campus? Where are the transfer students hanging out? What does it look like to engage with people on campus? That also means getting involved in clubs and organizations. That is a form of marketing. I also think wearing letters on campus is a form of marketing, right? So what does that look like to wear letters on campus? It's the passive marketing. A lot of campuses in the beginning of the spring semester have involvement fairs. Making sure that your chapter president talks to the fraternity and sorority life office. Do they have an involvement fair? Sometimes fraternities don't participate in that because they're like, oh, I'll just let the councils market Greek life, but they're not necessarily, they might have opportunities for chapters to be involved. Every campus is a little bit different, but thinking about, especially sometimes some of our smaller chapters, or chapters that are not even small, don't have chapter houses. So some of our chapters have to be more intentional about hanging out on campus. So I know used to work at American University. None of our chapters had houses there, but they were very intentional about parking themselves at certain tables in our student center, right? In our like student union building. So they're very intentional about hanging out on campus and wearing letters, right? So when I went to grad school, didn't have a DU chapter. They also they had a few chapter houses, but some chapters were very strategic that they would wear letters on certain days, right? Wednesday was their letters day, or Thursday was their letters day. So they'd be wearing their letters. And that was something that everyone in the chapter did. And it was also their way to market themselves as well. So whatever that looks like, I strongly recommend, if you don't have a chapter house, maybe there should be like a certain day where the entire chapter meets up on campus and the student center has lunch together, right? You're going to the freshman dining hall, all eating together, but it's a way, once again, to show presence and being on campus, right? Especially if you don't have a house, what can they do to get out there, get outside their facility, and just get out there and let people know that you're there? But often it's going to where freshmen eat, where they hang out, what organizations are freshmen joining, right? All of those things to be able to get your word out there, but different forms of marketing, but really work with our chapters on their social media game. Next week at the next week's recruitment webinar, we are going to have Natalie from our communications department is going to preview. We created a new recruitment marketing tool. So it's the social media toolkit for chapters on how to build social media. If they don't have a social media presence right now, what does that look like? So Natalie's going to be launching that, and also giving some examples of chapters and what types of things chapters are doing on Instagram to be able to kind of portray the day in the life of the chapter. So while it seems pretty straightforward, I think this is something that chapters often just completely forget about, and it's important for Gen Z. CJ, anything else? Okay.
No.
Okay, perfect. All right. So we're going to talk about event planning. This is all pretty basic fundamental stuff, though. But what we're realizing recently, that especially for smaller chapters, or struggling chapters, associate chapters, that there's very little chapter programming happening. I think the basic question in recruitment, so obviously we're asking a lot of questions to the guys going through recruitment, but on the flip side, they might say, well, hey, CJ, what do you guys do? Like, what are you guys known for? And sometimes chapters struggle to answer that question, right? So if they're, especially if they're brand new, if they're an associate chapter or smaller chapter, I think I mentioned this before with chapters when they're just focusing on recruitment and forget to actually be a fraternity, they forget to do brother events, right? They forget to do service events, philanthropy events. They just forget to do fundamentals and they become almost like a friend club that happens to be an fraternity. But what does that look like? So a good conversation is making sure is really helping your chapter from a recruitment standpoint is making sure they have a solid answer is like, what are the signature events? So like for us, my chapter, we did whitewater rafting event every year, but it was something that we got really excited about. So what does that look like from your perspective to help them what events they get excited for, making sure that it's not just social events. There's probably brother events, but often when you ask them, what is their favorite DU moment? That's a good pre-recruitment question to ask the guys when you're working with them. They often will share some like moments from when they're an associate member. They'll share a moment like they went on a camping trip, they went on a road trip together, right? They might have gone to a away game, right? Whatever that looks like, but some other moments that aren't just social events. So they're diversifying their answers. But some of you probably have some signature so thinking about brother events, service events, philanthropy events, major campus events. This could also be sporting events too. So major campus events could be sporting events. This could be homecoming. This could be Founders Day. This could be, I know some campuses have like major like Greek Week events or like, Penn State has dance marathon is so big they just call it thon, right? So, but I know like at Kansas they have something called Rock Shop Review, which is like a song and dance competition when paired up with sorority. But what are some of those major events that people just really like talking about? They might really care about sports intramurals, but what are the things that guys really get geeked out about and hyped up about? And I think that's important for you all to really work with them from a training perspective. Is what are you talking about with potential members? And if there's a lack of programming within the chapter. It's something that we can really help emphasizing and really kind of narrowing down what are we really good at and what do we sell our high points, because I think often some of our smaller struggling chapters or newer chapters really focus on, I know we're small, I know we're brand new, and then start recruiting from a deficit model. Does that make sense? So they are starting from like, I know we're small, I know we don't have a house, I know we don't have this, and then they automatically are, I mean, I don't think that's a great way to give a first impression to incoming freshmen, as opposed to starting with, these are the things we're excited about. And this is why I joined DU. They're really much are starting from a deficit and trying to like apologize. It's apologetic recruitment practices, which I don't think is the best way to go about it. So helping the chapters you're working with really focus on these types of events. So I mentioned before, what events work for you? What are your favorite events? Do you have any signature events? All of these are just questions that you can really work with your recruitment teams to really get people hyped. What are the events that get people hyped up about, right? Using Gen Z language, but whatever that looks like for you all is helping your chapters really talk about event planning, because beyond the scope of recruitment, I think we also talk about in recruitment. We also want to make sure that recruitment events really are a good portrayal of the day in the life of a DU chapter, right? That they give a good snapshot of this is what it's going to be like if you join DU, right? But some chapters will spend a crazy amount of money on during recruitment week or weeks, and then they never do those events throughout the rest of the year, right? So they might go axe throwing, they might go skydiving, they might do all these things, and they're like, wait a minute, I thought we did all this stuff during recruitment. I also struggle sometimes when chapters, their primary recruitment events are social events. Well, guess what? Guys are going to expect that there's going to be social events every night. Well, guess what? That's not really logical or financially, fiscally smart, or whatever that looks like. But often, if you recruit through social events, you're going to recruit partiers that are going to expect partying, and then they might get a little disappointed when the chapter is like, yeah, we might have one social event a month, if that, right? So I think it's a little bit of not being realistic if we're not doing a good job of portraying who we are, right? What is our brand? Like, what are we known for? What are our favorite events? What are the things that really get guys excited to be a DU, right? Perfect. All right. So, and these are just some good, just reminders as well. I mentioned all this, making sure that it's a mix of bigger and smaller events, whatever that looks like. Diversity events. I say this because we heard this last week at President's Academy about like not just having sporting events, right? So you play flag football one day, and then it's wiffle ball, and then you play basketball, and it's just sporting events. So what does it look like to be, I think also something that was brought up is like accessibility. Sometimes we don't know if someone might have a hidden disability. So what does that look like if your events are only active sporting events, that it's not being as accommodating or as accessible to someone who might not be able to do those events, right? So we also want to make sure events are fun. My advisor in college once told me, don't plan things that suck, Dominic. And I was like, excuse me. And he said, don't plan an event that you wouldn't want to go to yourself. Like if you're going to be hyped up and you know it's going to be fun, you're going to be able to promote it and get excited about when you're talking about a chapter. And I was like, that is true. Also, I think where an advisor can really be helpful is helping with budgeting. Often chapters forget, they just blow their entire semester budget on crazy big recruitment events because they think that's what's going to get people. But we all know people usually join for people. Yeah, like that Axe throwing event might have been fantastic, but also did you blow 60% of recruitment budget on one event? And really thinking about the best bang for your buck. So this is where advisors can really be helpful in working with the chapter and what that looks like. Fully understand. I went to campus where we had a gigantic recruitment budget because we did a heavy summer recruitment process. So for us, we had to keep up with the Joneses, but we never thought it was the smartest thing to do. And we were smart with our budget, but it was still, over $10,000 budget that we had to do but we were doing a lot of outdoorsy events because we're in Oregon, right? But that is something that I don't recommend because we always struggled with like, we could use this money more effectively. So this is where advisors can be really, and feel free if you have any questions or if you want to chime in, if you have any questions, feel free. I'm trying to go through these slides to make sure that we don't go
Dominic.
over. Yes, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think we're thinking on the flip side of like an Oregon or like a Missouri or a larger chapter, right? Like, but there might not be a budget or a huge budget when it comes to recruitment. So I think this is where, as advisors, you can help chapters kind of identify those programs or events that are happening on campus that maybe first years
Absolutely.
or second year students are going to. I my background is two state universities where whether it's the fall or whether it's the winter, when you come back, there's a welcome week of some event. There's different things every night. There's free food that students like to go to, and kind of utilizing those free events to students to kind of use that as a recruitment tactic, especially when you don't have a budget in place for recruitment.
Yeah, and that's perfect segue, CJ, because involvement fairs, welcome fairs. Think about transfer students. I think that's an untapped market on a lot of your campuses. That especially spring semester, a lot of schools we're seeing more recently too is this. Some of this Gen Z folks are sometimes taking fall off, so they might take a gap semester before they start. So sometimes you have brand new students at a university. Sometimes the universities are doing that because they don't have enough bed spaces for these folks in the fall. And then usually people might drop out of school so they have more space. So whatever that looks like for you is connecting with your fraternity sorority life office about transfer students or brand new students and how do we get those people involved. But you're going to have a lot of welcome back events, welcome weeks. I mentioned before, where do students eat, where do they hang out, what organizations do they join. If they don't know this, this is something is really talking to the fraternity and sorority life staff or just others, their friends on campus, right? I know some of your chapters, the freshmen move right in and never live in a residence hall. But I think it's important that they probably have friends or they know other people that are living on campus and finding out where these people hang out, where they eat, and that sometimes, especially if you're looking for new markets of people, is going to the freshmen or going where new students live and go into them, right? So canvassing campus and really being incredibly strategic about what student organizations they're joining. I know a lot of our successful chapters have RAs. They have people in student government. They find out some campuses have big pre-orientation programs where they have like people sign up to be the facilitators or the student leaders for some of these projects and trips, right? When I worked at Northwestern, some of our biggest, most successful recruitment chapters were very strategic about getting guys to be basically think about like camp counselors for all of these pre-orientation trips before school even started. But there was a leadership. There was in this particular case, there was a leadership pre-orientation one. There was a community service one. There was an outdoor adventure one. So there's specifically people that are seeking out leadership opportunities before they even got to campus. And I was like, these are prime markets that these are the guys you want in your chapters, right? These are people that are seeking out opportunities on campus. And trust me, a very large chunk of the guys who were freshmen who went through those pre-orientation programs ended up in fraternities because their leaders, the people they looked up to, their counselors were already in chapters, right? So it was a great opportunity that was like a very easy pipeline straight into certain chapters that were very strong, very large, and just really strong operational chapters. So just think about great ways to take advantage of things. So referrals are another thing. So thinking about how you use them. For some of your chapters, you're not doing this. We can get you access to alumni lists as well. But we traditionally, for brand new expansions, will send out something specific to alumni around alumni referrals. So, like if you have, a son, a nephew, grandson, or next door neighbor kid, it doesn't have to be a blood relative. We're not just looking for legacies. We're looking for who do you know that's going to Michigan Tech? Who do you know that's going to Lehigh? Who do you know? And really reaching out to them in advance. I know sometimes that can be undergraduate referrals. So this could be people that you go to high school with, but that also sometimes you also don't just want a chapter that's made up of guys from 4 different high schools, right? So we don't want it to be, we want this to be a diverse chapter. I know some of our stronger chapters also really lean into friends and family members. When I say this could also be loved ones. This could be girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever this looks like. But who do they know that's already coming to school, right? So if you know someone who's going to Kansas State, a lot of our chapters are being really intentional about asking for referrals as soon as people are getting admitted. And this is the semester where usually by February, March, people are starting to get their admittance. In some cases, people have already gotten into their choices, right? So some of them might have done early admittance. So they already know they're coming to the University of Oklahoma next fall, right? So how do you start connecting with these people before they even start the campus? Because they're probably coming for a welcome event, right? So often people get admitted, whether not early admittance, but people who get admitted usually in April is an entire month of previews, right? It's a preview month. They have students that are coming to 4 different schools, being like, got into 4 schools. I'm trying to figure out which of the 4 I want to go to, right? So this is where chapters can be intentional about how you connect with these people, but it's not being afraid to ask your friends, to ask your loved ones, to ask your alumni, do you have referrals? Do you know people? It is not a sign of desperation. Our strongest chapters in DU do this. Our strongest chapters in the nation are very intentional that this is, not only do we need money sometimes from our alumni, or often we need alumni support for scholarships and support, we also need names. We need people to refer us. And ideally, we're communicating with our alumni. We have a good reputation on campus. People know us because we're doing great work in philanthropy. So we have a good reputation that they're willing to refer their younger brother, their cousin, their whatever that looks like, their boyfriend to us, be able to say like, hey, my boyfriend's not really a fraternity guy, but he might be a great to you, right? So whatever that looks like, just not being afraid to tap into these and branching out from just recruiting guys from your high school. I do think that's a great market because I think a lot of chapters are not very intentional about who do you know who's coming to Western Illinois. Like, let's reach out to them over spring break, reach out to them over the summer. Like, let's get them over to the chapter house for a barbecue. That's great, but we also want to make sure that we're diversifying referrals as well. So let me know if you have questions about that, but we can assist you with alumni lists specifically around, and we have sample referral forms if you all want to look at something like that, and we can send that to you. So, okay. So what we're going to do is transition into kind of the 365 recruitment model. Those of you who might have been part of or sat in on any of the summer Amplify sessions, we wanted to talk specifically about recruitment zones. So if we break recruitment up into 5 zones, potentially 6 zones if you're at a quarter system school, we only have 3 or 4 quarter system schools in all of VU, but thinking about breaking up the recruitment model. So over the Amplify session, we usually go through every zone. For this particular case, I'm just going to focus on early spring and mid to late spring because 'tis the season and we're in January. So, but this is where I wanted to really kind of be strategic about when people hear 365, they think some undergrads sometimes will kindly give you the middle finger and say, I'm not going to give out bids every single week. And we're like, we're not saying that, but we're being intentional about you're always on the lookout for people joining the chapter, right? But at the beginning, early fall and early spring or winter quarter at Oregon State, Washington, is we want people to be intentional. So I'll talk through. So January and February, if you want to grow your names list, we're going to talk to you about a new resource that we have from the DU portal around your names list. But who do they know? Who are the people they talk to in the fall? Who are the people that you are? They probably should be going into the spring with people that they already know. So there should become some kind of names list. So from an advisor standpoint, if the chapter doesn't have a names list of people, these might have been people who said, not this semester, but hit me up in January, right? So making sure the chapter has a names list so we're not starting from scratch. They shouldn't be starting from scratch because the people, your associate members from the fall, probably had friends, probably had roommates, all of friends from class that you should be asking people continuously who is on your names list. We also want to make sure you're preparing for formal recruitment. Some chapters are deferred, heavy deferred and recruit campuses, so they might already. When I worked at the last two schools I worked at were deferred recruitment campuses. Our joke within the fraternity story life office was it was called the deferred joining because the chapters that did really well were the ones that by the time the guys go through recruitment in January, they already know what chapter they want to join because the chapter did such a good job at reaching out to them, doing all the recruitment things. They were recruiting them, but they didn't give out bids, right? But there was strong efforts and strong recruitment efforts throughout the fall that they got to meet the brothers, they got to go to events, whatever that looks like, right? So we talked about referrals. We also want to make sure you're doing refresher training and skill building. You probably have men who have never been through a recruitment process before. So what does that look like? We'll talk about. We actually have a new resource for chapters that we just created right before the holidays, and I'll talk about that. But an actual a pre-recorded webinar that you all could use with your chapters or your VP recruitments to use to train your chapter before recruitment actually starts. So we'll talk about that in a second. Event planning, finalizing budget, social media marketing plans. So all of this stuff is stuff we've talked about, but we want to make sure they're being intentional. And ideally, if they were being smart, mid to late fall, they should already have a names list. They should already be working on some of these things in advance. So let's flip to mid to late spring. So thinking about this, say the chapter might have your goal was 8, they might have got, but your stretch goal might have been 12, right? For what going into the recruitment. So maybe they got 6, right? And you're like, hey, some chapters get burned out and you're like, I don't really want to do this. Like the recruitment VPs, like, that was so much work. I don't know if I have time for this. But really kind of changing the mindset to mid to late spring can really still be informal events. So this could be February, March, April, depending on whenever your formal quote unquote recruitment period is. But what does it look like to continuously recruit people? Because there probably are people that might have gone through recruitment that didn't find the home for them or joined a chapter. And then the first night they got there and they're like, I don't like these guys. Or they got hazed. Or they're just like, this is not what I thought I joined. And often those guys are still looking for an opportunity to join. So there might have been guys that you might have given a bid to, but they ended up joining another chapter. So this is where it's important to keep in touch with these people. And you find out that John that you loved ended up joining another chapter. And then John's like, never mind. It might be a good opportunity to reach back out to John and be like, hey, we still have a spot for you this semester, right? So whatever that looks like for you all is making sure though, but it's also the time to start thinking about you want to continue to start growing your names list, but this is where I already talked about before is who is coming to your campus next year, utilizing those referrals and constituents. So what does it look like to tap into all your female friends, your non-Greek friends, whatever that looks like is who is coming to campus and paying attention to preview days, admitted student days. Those are all the things that are really important for y'all. And then start planning for if you have the ability to do summer recruitment or fall, it does not hurt if you can do it. If you I can do a whole seminar on summer recruitment because I was a product of summer recruitment. I used to advise a couple of our larger chapters that were at summer recruitment models, but there's intentional ways to be smart and strategic and organized during a summer recruitment process. If that's a possibility, I can help you with that of going in and being just more intentional, budgeting, location of brothers where they are during the summer. How can you do small informal events throughout the summer just to get DU's name out there? So if you have a bunch of guys in Dallas, guys in Houston, guys in Kansas City, guys in St. Louis, how are you just doing smaller scale barbecues, maybe taking guys to a baseball game, whatever that looks like is what are those small scale events that the people that are in Dallas can do to interact with the people that are coming to your campus in the fall. So that's just an example, but I can do a much deeper dive in that later. So 365 in practice, this is just a good example, is they can always build a names list. They can always engage with potential new members, right? My chapter used to incentivize that if someone joined the chapter because of you, if they got initiated, we created a financial incentive. Sometimes that's not possible for smaller chapters or new chapters, but we gave incentives to people to give us potential members. There was we always our mantra was any non-affiliated man, it could be a potential D, right? So this is in class, this is in student organizations. This could be at the rec center. Like you play basketball the same three freshmen every week. Are you like why aren't you connecting with them? Why aren't you inviting them over to play basketball with the guys? Like what does that look like? So creative with recruitment positions and timelines. I mentioned about being flexible with having two VP recruitments or whatever that looks like for you. You can build relationships with classmates, all the campus programming, as CJ mentioned, like welcome weeks, student involvement fairs, student organizations, all of those different things. This is the kind of things that 365 in practice, that it doesn't necessarily mean you're giving out bids every day, every week. You can, but, and also it means that we are flexible. We recommend an 8-week process. It's okay. Some chapters, because their campus has to do a 6-week process, some chapters shrink their associate member education process. We've seen some chapters do 2 associate member classes in the same semester because a month into school they met 5-6 new guys and they're like, wow, actually this is great. So they were flexible enough to start a new associate member process, and they just ran some of the education was joined with the guys who'd already just joined. But being flexible with things, there are a lot of things that we're super flexible with, because I think some chapters think like, oh, if we haven't started our social member process by January 20th, like we just the campus won't let us. And sometimes there are campus restrictions, but a lot of times campuses have deadlines on when you need to initiate the person, not necessarily when they could join. So I think being really careful about that some chapters get caught up in, well, if we don't recruit, but also we will allow you to do a shorter associate member process if that is going to work for your chapter. So not being so caught up in what campus policies, IFC policies, and things like that. So this is where we can help with that. I don't mind calling a director of Greek life and being like, hey, let's navigate. What does this look like? And often they just need you to initiate by if they're strict about that. So, okay. So this is an opportunity. I am going to stop sharing the screen. What we're going to do is, the portal launched. Oh, 1 second, CJ. So the portal launched in this past August, and CJ is going to do a walkthrough because there's a new resource for chapters to actually start using the names list, but actually using the portal to build their names list. So let me stop sharing my screen, CJ, and then you can pull up the portal.
Okay. All right. So yeah, like Dominic mentioned, this rolled out in August. There's a webinar that happened in August, if not early September. That some of you might have been on, and you can definitely go back through to look at all the different functionalities of the portal. Obviously we're specifically highlighting the recruitment tab here, but I do kind of want to make note that everyone in the chapter has access to the recruitment tab here. Not everybody in the chapter has access to the chapter statement and have the functionality to move things around, but everybody has access to this recruitment tab. And so I'm kind of using Arlington here as an example because they already have P&M names in here, which is great to see, right? So anybody in the chapter can kind of come in and, if they meet somebody from class, let's say it's Jason, they can go ahead and click on and add a potential new member. It's very simple to just kind of come in, add in names, and go from there. And this is really meant to help with that organizational piece, because oftentimes, especially coming into this winter, new VP recruitments like we talked about, they try to understand the role, figure it all out. So this is our way of trying to help them kind of track recruitment as they go throughout their process. And so VP recruitment can come in, and as they go throughout recruitment, they can kind of start to put people in different buckets, right? So, if they just get a name, put it in, they can put it here under the potential new member column, as they kind of go through recruitment, right? If we reach out to Jacob here, and we reach out to him and say, hey, we're having an event this Tuesday, we're going to the basketball game. The whole chapter is like, love for you to come, obviously that's P&M contacted. If Jacob shows up, again, move him along down the timeline to engage. Once we get to that point where bids are offered, we can keep dragging him along, and he ends up here. Hopefully, right? Jacob says yes, and we can report him. And that's great. I think one thing though that can be heavily utilized with this process is that VP recruitment can come in here and put tags on people. And this helps kind of with those connection pieces, right? So, if we know Jacob is from, Houston, you can go ahead and put a tag on him. This is Houston, to help connect. Maybe you have, you know, two, three different guys who are from the Houston area that can kind of have a conversation with Jacob of, Houston and how he's transitioning to campus and all those sorts of things. He's big into baseball, right? Like you can have that. And then if you back out, everyone in the chapter then at that point is able to see what are the different things. And so obviously we want our VP of recruitments to come in and be able to kind of point guys in directions of potential members that have those conversations. But let's just say, that's not the case. Guys in the chapter can come in and see those connections and kind of know going into an event, oh, Jacob's, a big Houston guy. He loves baseball. How can I engage him in these conversations? And so I think it's really important that our chapters have these things. In the past, we've had just like a static spreadsheet that can be updated and highlighted as chapters see fit. And this really gives them, the freedom to kind of make it more interactive and make it a lot more useful for chapters, according to what they need. Some chapters, as you guys know, you guys might have things like Chapter Builder or other online platforms. If you have those, that's great. Utilize whatever you need to utilize according to campus policies. But this is our way of being able to help you all kind of navigate the recruitment process. And I will say, I think as advisors, I think this is where you all can kind of work with your VP of recruitments of making sure this is up to date, right? So maybe if classes start on Monday, next Monday, maybe we follow up at the end of the day, like, hey, how many names do we have? Where are we at? I can see in the portal right now we have, only three. Why is that? And kind of have that conversation and kind of nudge them along through the process. Um, and so I think this is also a good way for you to hold them accountable as they're going throughout it as well. And then VP recruitment is the only one who can kind of make edits here. Um, the five undergraduate members are the president, VP finance, the VP administration, VP recruitment, and VP member ed. And then you all, if you're either the chapter advisor or the VP of finance advisor, you all have the capability to move people and edit as you see fit. Um, so again, obviously, if we're thinking about roles during recruitment, maybe you're having maybe the VP admin is going to be the one who's kind of coming through while the chapter's having a conversation about a certain member. You're having, that vote on if you want to extend the bid. Maybe he's not going through in here and moving it himself. Maybe it is the VP recruitment, whatever that looks like, but everyone has, those five undergraduate members have the access to be able to move that and move them along during the timeline. So.
Can I, CJ, real quick? Um, can you scroll to the right real quick? I think the bid offered part also allows you to move them straight to reporting them. Um, so previously we had that form on our website that you reported associate members and initiates, but now that allows you to do it with that report button. I will say with the decline tab too, I will say too, though, that could be the case where that someone who is like not this semester, but next semester, you could leave them. And if it's flat out declined, like we don't want to you, but you could keep them in the decline bid or put them back into the engaged category, right? So you can move them around and still have them. Because I think often just because someone says no right now, chapters completely are like, okay, bye. And then not realizing like, hey, we could still engage this person throughout the semester. We can invite them to other events. Often, my mom put me on a parent imposed deferred recruitment. But I had already gone through recruitment and I had engaged with DU and a couple other chapters throughout the fall. So I kind of already had an idea, but the DU guys were continuously keeping me engaged and it would invite me like, to a philanthropy event, or I think I got invited to a service event once when I was still a PNM, but it was ways to still keep them engaged. So just some ideas from an advisor standpoint. You can use this. Often chapters have a crappy Excel document, and I think they just are not being very organized and strategic in the recruitment process, and they just have no clue who are we recruiting. who do we know? And they're not also, going back to what CJ said, they're also not asking the right questions to your members or associate members of like, who do you know in class? Who do you know in your lab groups? Who do you know in student organizations? Like, who are your next door neighbors? And making them brainstorm, right? So this is where like people, you sometimes you need to do the activity with them that actually have them write down potential new guys and what does that look like even if you're not friends with this person, still write down like, oh yeah, John from down the hall, right? You don't might not need to know John's last name and his phone number or email yet, but at least write down the name, and then you could figure out how to track down John's contact information. So sometimes the art of brainstorming is really important for chapters to do that because they don't actually like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Oh yeah, that guy actually there is a guy on my floor that actually would I don't really know him, but he seems like a good guy, whatever that looks like. But sometimes chapters forget to ask those questions and then we lose out on opportunities to meet guys.
Yep, absolutely. And I will say if you go down that route, I would definitely say I'd encourage you to have the guys put down as a tag, if we don't know their last name, at least put in a tag of like, oh, Dominic was the one who put this in here. So like we can follow with Dominic later of who this guy is and how we can reach out to him. Because otherwise I think that's just going to get lost once again in the shuffle. And so making sure you're having these guys get into these healthy practices of, putting down who it is who put down the name, who can follow up and do all those sorts of things. So,
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, CJ.
yep.
All right, let me share my screen again, and then the next few slides are going to go through relatively quickly. Um, uh, just a little bit, they can also update rosters and officers and initiate an associate reporting. So just important the people use the portal from an advisory standpoint too. We need chapters to activate their portal accounts or basically claim their accounts because we realize that we have almost 2,000 people within the fraternity undergrads who have not even logged in. So something to think about. All right. This is another resource. I mentioned this earlier. I'm going to just quickly fly through this. This is going to be a resource I think we're sending out next week. What it is, it's an hour plus recruitment skills workshop. So the chapter actions plan calls for this, but it also is what I mentioned at the beginning is that chapters often fail at the setup and getting people organized and knowing what to talk about, who we are, um, all of those things before recruitment, right? So we created Hayden Ron used to work for us. Hayden was our former expansion and recruitment guy on staff. So he and I co-led a program that it's a pre-recorded program that we can use. We set it up as a train the trainer webinar. So it's something where VP recruitments can pause it along the way and have Hayden and I facilitate the conversations, or we also will provide a copy of the PowerPoint slides. So the VP recruitment and you as the advisor could watch the webinar together and then actually teach it back to the chapter and pick and choose which activities you want to use with the chapter. So both identity of who are we as a chapter, what are we looking for, identifying potential new members and where to find them. These are activities that you can lead for the undergrads in your chapter or associate chapter. Conversation skills, practicing conversation skills. How do you deal with difficult conversations of like, I don't want to join a fraternity because I don't drink. I don't want to join a fraternity because I don't want to get hazed. I don't want to join a fraternity because I can't afford it, right? So how is the chapter associate chapter prepared to have those conversations? We really lean into allowing guys to really help articulate their DUI, like why DU is important to them, why they joined DU, why are you still involved in DU? So what does that look like to have a pre-recruitment conversation? And we also want them to talk about logistics, event planning, commitment to recruitment, all these things that chapters struggle with that we put into a training seminar to be used prior to the recruitment process. So it's going to be the pre-recorded webinar, the PowerPoint slides, a facilitator guide that can help you, the recruitment advisor, or the VP recruitment or recruitment team facilitate the activities for the chapter, and then it'll be a sample of other chapters training sessions. So we pulled some samples from CP actually last year of some chapters that just have some outlines of training activities and whatnot, just things to get your chapter prepared, right? As a former recruitment chapter for a couple different chapters, often that recruitment training is so critical, even just to talk about like what are we looking for, who are we looking for, like what are the qualities of an ideal DU, but just to get the chapter to actually talk about it so they know what questions to ask in the recruitment process. So super helpful. Is this something that we realized was a need for chapters? We did a completely separate webinar just for all that. So other quick things as well. We have a recruitment website as well. So on the DU website, under resources and then chapter resources, there's a bunch of resources under VP recruitment. Also on the DU website, if you just type in recruit, it's Delta Upsilon, it's deltu.org/recruitment dash programming. But that is something CJ could potentially drop it in the chat box as well. But it's recruitment/programming. It has all the former Amplify recruitment training programs. So from the last couple of years, so there's a training program on including diversity and recruitment practices. Last summer, we actually had someone who's a D1 hockey coach at a school in the Northeast. He actually went a step-by-step over two separate training sessions to actually walk us through what does it look like to identify prospects and what does it look like to continue to keep prospects interested to get those prospects to actually join his hockey team. But there's incredible amount of transferable skills. His wife is a sorority woman, so he's grown up around fraternities and sororities, but he's able to transfer all of his skills that he used in the athletic process into the fraternity recruitment process. So a lot of really good lessons learned. So just some really good resources on there. There's also, we'll be doing recruitment training at RLA in February as well. So we encourage people to do. We're also going to offer IHQ staff recruitment coaching. So if you want to schedule a meeting with myself or another staff member, we have two recruiters on staff as well that are two people that are expansion consultants. We can set up a call with you, your VP recruitment, your recruitment team, and you as the advisor to talk through like what are specific needs for my chapter, my associate chapter. So we can do any of that. And then I also just wanted to preview next week. So CJ can drop in the link into the chat. So CJ is going to drop in the Zoom link for session 2, which is this next Tuesday at 8 o'clock Eastern. So as an advisor, you can join that. If you want to sit in, I mentioned before, we're going to have our social media team, the person who does social media for us, give a quick presentation. We're also going to do some conversations around closing the deal and extending bids. We're going to talk about Sums Free Housing and how to sell to you in the model of Sums Free Housing. We're going to talk about recruitment restrictions and standards. I think some chapters get overcomplicate their bidding process, who they can give a bid to, and overcomplicate like everyone in the chapter needs to meet this guy, we won't give them a bid, right? So I think there's a lot of restrictive policies about how people can get bids, who is eligible to get a bid, and what that looks like. So we want to just walk through some of that. We're going to talk about the social media marketing tool that we're using. We are going to do a quick portal recruitment at 365 conversation with them as well, but most of the content will be new if you want to just sit in on it. So this is an extra resource for all of you as well. And this is my contact information. That's my cell phone number. That's my email address. So if you want to take a screenshot of this, if you want to text me or email me, and if you want additional assistance for recruitment, let me know. We have assigned, I think, about 12 chapters specific recruitment coaches that are volunteers. So Hayden Ron, Mark Yerke, and Kyle Hickman, Kyle used to work for us, have volunteered to be recruitment coaches for high need recruitment chapters. If you would like some coaching sessions as well for your associate chapter, please let us know and we can get that to you. So that is our